All right, so good afternoon, everybody. And we're gonna, as I mentioned a second ago, we're gonna start by talking about how images are formed. And we're gonna start with the eye. Now, there's some interesting things about the eye. Like most of you are probably familiar with the basics, right? There's an eyeball and you've got the cornea, right? And you've got an iris. A lot of these features, though, are gonna be copied when we go to our cameras. We wanna know why and what function do they have. And how does your eye actually create images? Because we copied this pretty directly when we make a lot of our camera arrays. All right. So, for instance, why is there an iris? I guess I should ask first, what is the iris? Right, it's that muscle right inside the colored part of your eye. Sometimes, right, it could be brown or blue or whatever. Right? So why do I have that iris? What function does it serve? All right, so it was going to narrow or widen to allow more or less light to come in. Now, have any of you ever like had trouble seeing something and so you kind of squint? Why do people do that? I mean, like everybody, you go across any culture in the world, right? Something gets hard to see and people squint. Why? So it actually turns out if you just have a really small opening, you miss all the distortion from the sides. So it actually functions a lot like a lens. The very early cameras used this, right? The smaller the hole you go through, it actually is going to increase the quality. It's going to get crisper and sharper. So you might have heard of pinhole cameras. You can just make a camera literally by taking a box, putting a pin hole on one side, and you can adjust a sheet of paper on the back side, and you'll get a well-formed image at a certain point. So it's a really nice way to do it. This is often done for like observing eclipses, right? Because you can't damage anything. So you get a piece of cardboard or something, poke a hole in it, and you can just actually image onto the ground. The smaller and rounder the hole, the crisper the image you're going to get. Okay? Now the disadvantage, the smaller the hole, think about your iris here for a sec, what happens? In addition to getting a crisper, I mean smaller and smaller hole, what do you get less of? Light. Okay? So it's going to take more and more time for you to be able to get enough photons. So if you're trying to develop this on paper or you've got a sensing array, the smaller it gets, the more time it's going to get till you built up enough photons to see it. So if any of you have an interest in like astronomy or something, this is why they will often have very long shoots. Because if I want to see a very, very distant star, only a few photons might be hitting from something that's, you know, a billion light years away. To get the very deep fields, it can take hours to build up enough photons to be able to image something. Because there's just not enough of them. It's like coming from a very small aperture. We can use this to our advantage sometimes. So you can build, I was contemplating building a pinhole camera, but with coronavirus, there was like no easy way to do it. But I'm going to describe it if you want to build on your own. This is kind of a fun project. Just get a cardboard box. And what you're going to do is you'll cut a little hole on one side, okay, so that you can get a cardstock. It's really hard to poke a pin through cardboard. So you're just cutting a hole so that if you try to poke a pin through cardboard, you're going to get a really weird shape and it's going to bend the paper, right? So you cut a hole so that you can put a piece of cardstock on the end, and you can put a pinprick on that and then tape it. And you'll just get a better hole. And if you ever mess it up, you haven't messed the whole box up, you just throw that away, do a new pinprick, and away you go, right? Then what you do is like pick an old shoebox or something, do it on the short side of the shoebox. So you can leave the lid off, make it a little bit dark, have a window open, and just take a piece of paper, like blank printer paper, and just you aim it towards the window and you move till you get at the right distance, and you'll see an image form. It'll become really crisp at the right distance. And you just mark that on the bottom. Now we need some way to store the image, right? So I thought about that would be an easy way to do it. And this is the thing that stopped me on the coronavirus one. I was going to get little wood blocks and have you paint it with, have you ever seen it like craft shops? They often have those glow-in-the-dark paint. Well, glow-in-the-dark paint absorbs photons and then emits them back. Okay? So we can actually use that to create an image storage. So you would paint the wood block or put a piece of paper on it and paint the block so you get a nice flat surface. Don't get ones that are like pink glow in the dark, right? Because that's going to make it different. You want the most bland looking glow in the dark color you can get, which is usually that light lemony green color or whatever. But I couldn't pass the paint around and things like that, so that kind of shot it off for me. But you paint it on and you put it at that distance inside your shoebox. You close the lid, point it towards what you want, leave it to sit there for a few minutes. Take your box into a dark spot, open it. You will see the image on the block that you just painted because it'll glow for a while and then it'll fade out. It's kind of a really interesting way to see, and you can try moving it a little bit and you can see what it looks like in adjustment and out of adjustment and things of that sort. You can even try replacing and get smaller pinholes and try it with a longer time. So it's a fun way to kind of play with it and get some experience with how a pinhole can adjust. Your iris actually does that function. So if you ever have problems seeing something, now at your age, and I thought this too, I'm like, I had perfect vision when I was younger and now I've got glasses. So, but at some point along your life, you're probably going to need glasses. If you try this, take your glasses off if you've got glasses, and take a look at some text, right? And then you'll see it's kind of blurry and out of adjustment. If you make a little tiny pinprick with your fingers, right? You put them together and you leave a little hole, right? You can actually pull that up to your eye and you can adjust it by squeezing your fingers. And you'll notice it'll cut some of the light out, but as it gets small, it's going to become really, really sharp and clear. So even if you've got bad vision and you ever lose that, you can actually create using this pinhole technique to be able to see stuff. There have been times I've forgotten my glasses, gone to a restaurant, and I've done that, and my wife's like, "You're doing it again." I'm like, "Sorry." Either that or you're reading the menu to me. So, but it can allow you to get away with stuff when it goes on. And you're using then one of our techniques of light adjustment to assist your eyes. The wider you make it, the more light that's going to come in, but the less crisp the image. So you can adjust and see till you get where you want. It's another way you can kind of test that idea of how does a pinhole camera work. This will work for things even at really big distances. Most lenses have some focal length. The neat thing is the pinhole has an infinite focal length. So it will actually make everything into focus. It doesn't matter how deep it is. So even whether you're nearsighted or farsighted or whatever, you can actually look and it will actually clear up the image. It'll make it grainier, right, or darker, right, because you'll get less light to it. But it will become crisper. So even if you need to see something farther away, you can do that same type of technique. Or you can poke a pinhole in a single piece of cardstock. It will do the same effect. Okay? So just some ways you can kind of take advantage of this. All right. So that's the first part. Now we have a lens, right? And your eyeball actually also deforms, right? So this is why I need glasses at this point, because in order to see things close, I've got a joke, right? As I get older, my arms shrink. Not really shrinking, but it's just the length I have to hold something out to be able to read it gets farther and farther. So at a certain point, it exceeds my arm's capacity to make it fit, right? Hence why I need the glasses. Well, your eye, in order to adjust on things, squeezes. It's a ball. And it'll focus, it'll adjust the length that it needs to get a good clear image by squeezing itself. And to see things at different lengths, it'll do some things by kind of flattening out, kind of tightening in like a plate. And to see really far things, it'll squeeze like a football to try and get more telescopic, to get a longer length onto it. After it's done this so much, your eyeball starts getting more and more rigid as you get older, and it doesn't want to adjust. So as it becomes less flexible as you age, it's going to be stuck in whatever one you did the most of. Okay? Now you can keep your eyes healthier by actually doing some eye exercises. So all of you are probably having to do computers all the time, and so I just want to pass this little nugget on to you. What you should do is about every 15 minutes, right? You've been looking at that length. You're going to force your eyes to shape to this length. It's going to make your eyesight worse. Every 15 minutes or so, look up. Adjust to something really close to you. Wait, get it really clear, hold it for a few secs. Look at something mid-range, maybe arm's length. Same thing, adjust. Pick something kind of mid-far, like across the room. Let it adjust. Pick something really far out, like a distant tree or something like that, right? When I used to be in California teaching this, I'd say, look at the mountains. Here, I'd say, look at a water tank, right? Get something that's a little bit further out. If you do that, what you're doing is you're just running your eye through a stretching exercise so that your eye stays flexible and healthy. It'll save you a lot. When I first started working on as an engineer in my 20s, I was working on some CAD things, drawing them up, and these are kind of old monitors, so they were like a big electron gun pointed at your head. After about 2-3 months, my vision had gotten so bad I wouldn't be able to recognize you as a person. I'd see your shape, but I couldn't recognize your face at this distance. That's not very far at all. I had perfect eyesight. It terrified the snot out of me. So I read up on what's going on, and that's when I found that exercise. And I did that every day, and my eyesight came back. And aside from the really close stuff, I actually deliberately look at further away things. You can do what you want, but my suggestion is if you try to focus your eyes a little bit more further, if your eye's going to fail, I'd rather see the far stuff because I can still drive. It's kind of a silly thought, but I can always get readers to get up close. But it's really hard to drive, right? So, I just mentioned this to think, right? Because you're becoming experts in imaging and light. You're not just, how do I process a camera? We want you to understand the physics of light, why it works, how you can use it. And that should affect how you work on your own body, right? Make sense? Okay. Now, if you look at this, right, the light comes in, right, through the cornea, which is your protective area. Your lens is underneath it, and it's going to come straight back. This is through the center of the eye. The nerve at the back, you notice it's off-center. Why would you put the nerve off-center? Doesn't it make more sense if it was straight in the back? Yeah. Why is there a dead spot on the nerve? You're exactly right. If you've ever looked at like a computer case where the cables come in, right, they have to bend and twist everywhere. It's no different with our nerve cells. Where it comes in on the back of your eye, it's going to have to bend and twist. There's no room to put the rods and cones necessary to see. So therefore, wherever that cable comes in, you literally can't see. Now, how many of you see a completely dark spot in your eye? It's there on both of them, but you don't see it, do you? You know why? Your brain fills it in. Your brain knows kind of what's going on. You've been looking around. It literally fills it in. It goes, oh yeah, ignore that dark spot, right? Ignore the blank area. Fill it in with stuff. So it's going to actually take care of it. This is part of why I say you are seeing what you're seeing, but you're kind of not too. Your brain is going to fill in a lot of the gaps because this is a really good combination of hardware and software that work together to generate a correct image. It's like it was made by a really, really smart person. Okay. At the back, right along that center, you'll see a spot there that's called the fovea. Right, so you'll see it right along that axis. That fovea, it actually is indented down a little bit on it. And that is where the vast majority of your color seeing part of your eye is. Right? So you've got two different types, the rods and the cones. You've got one of them that just sees it's designed for color. There's different varieties of them, but almost all of them are really densely concentrated in that little tiny area on the back of your eye. That's where all of your detail side is. That's why your eye moves to what you want to see, because that's where the high density sensor is. As you move away from it, right, you'll have a few color sensing ones, but they get farther and farther apart. And you'll end up with more of just light intensity detectors. Okay? And these ones are what give you kind of your night vision, your ability to see when the lights go down. Right? They're much bigger. That's why they don't give you as good of a crisp image, but because they're bigger, they gather more light. So they don't give you a good crisp thing, but they will give you that nice coverage of being able to see when it's darker because they can gather a lot of light. Make sense? Okay. How many have heard that your eye's sensor is backwards? A few people, right? So it is actually in one sense true. But I've heard people say that this is a bad design, and that's totally not true. Whoever is saying that is either an idiot or a liar, right? I give the possibilities, but you cannot know what you're talking about and make that statement truthfully. Okay? The reason is your eye, in order to make an image, just like any other thing, have you ever had your cell phone or your computer do a really intense task? What happens when you really have it do it? Yeah, it heats up, right? It gets really, really hot, doesn't it? Your eye is doing a crazy intense task. So guess what it does? It heats up. So how do you cool your eye? You need coolant liquid, don't you? What's the body's coolant liquid? Blood. Right? You need a lot of oxygen flowing to it, and you need a lot of cooling. So the back of your eye has a lot of blood flowing into it. Now, has anybody ever had blood get in their eye or anything like that? If you do, if you get hit or you get in an accident, sometimes you get blood in your eye. You'll see blood is amazingly red, and if you try to look through blood, it's a really bad picture. So your eye needs to have a really big, heavy cooling layer of liquid. Where do you want that? Well, you don't want it between the light source and the eye, so you have to put that on the back end of the eye, right? And it's got to really cool and oxygenate the back. So there's no room for anything else other than the cooling oxygen supply liquid on the back of the eye. So that back surface of the eye is doing all kinds of coverage to get you oxygen and cooling. So where do you run the cables to the sensor? Can't run them on the back. I've got the cooling fluid there. So where do you have to run it? Yeah, you have to run it on the inside of the eye here. This is what they're calling backwards, because they say the cables are between the light source and the detector. Well, that's because if you didn't do it, the detector would burn up. As an added bonus, blood, can you see through it? No. Those cables, they're translucent. This is what they don't mention to you, right? It doesn't block the light at all. So it's irrelevant that you put the cables on that side. So if you were a good engineer, are you going to put the thing that blocks light or doesn't block light in the light path? I've never understood why people make this statement. The eye is an incredible piece of machinery and well worth copying. Right? It's amazing how it's designed. So it really is just a marvel. All right. So now you kind of know how those ones work as well. So all the cabling is running here, and it runs, and it comes in to this nerve sheath and down, and you got all this blood running in the back, and it feeds the back line and supplies your retina. So that is how the eyeball works. This, we'll get to the next line, This shows you a graph of those lovely rods and cones. So your cones, you can see, are detected right on that 0 axis is where the fovea is. So you can see the cones are heavily concentrated right in the fovea, and the rods aren't there at all. All right, so it's a very, very small part of your eye. This is in degrees off of it. But you pretty much have this gigantic concentration of cones. There are several different types of cones because you have to detect different colors. Right? Remember those rods, those are your light detectors. They're really, really big. You want to stick some big things in the midst of a high density array? No, so they're left out of it. Right? So it's a really clever thing, and you can see the blind spot there where all the nerves come in. And otherwise, you're trying to fill the outside edge of your eye with these large light detectors. With a few, you can see the line is non-zero. There is some color in there, and it's just enough for your eye to go, oh, I've already seen that, and it can kind of paint it more intensity as it needs to inside your brain. So that's actually how your eye works on these things. Very, very small, intense spot for it. You can see just how extreme it is for that carry. And that's actually what you're working on. So that's why your eyes have to track what you want high intensity on. All right. Make sense? Now, when we do this, we're going to make, just in the area we want to capture an image, we're going to make a single high density array. Now, those cones I mentioned, there's different types. How many people have ever heard of color blindness? Okay, anybody have color blindness? Color blindness runs a little bit in my family, so there's some red-green stuff. But you hear there's like red-green. Anybody know another color blindness runs red-green? Blue-yellow is the other common one. All right, so those are the two most common. That's because that's the ones that those cones detect. So if you have a deficiency of the cone that distinguishes between red and green, you will have red-green color blindness. That's why it's a spectrum. They don't say, it's not like you totally don't see it or totally do. It depends on how many of them. Do you have enough of them? Right? Another cone distinguishes between blue and yellow. Anybody wonder why tigers are considered camouflage? A big orange cat going through a green jungle? It's because orange is red, and the vast majority of animals do not see color. So since they lack the red-green cones to be able to distinguish between them, guess what they see? They see green. It's just one color. There's no difference between red or green. So, you know, if you've ever seen a house cat that's red, like, you know, we used to live in the countryside, and, you know, the kids had this big, fuzzy red cat. And they'd be like, wow, he is not stealthy at all, right there. He's right there in the field, right? But like animals would be like, pretending like they don't notice. And they're like, why not? That's because the animals that are being hunted cannot tell the difference. So his big, shaggy cat self looked just like a pile of grass. So he really was stealthy as crazy because red-green color blindness. Okay. So you can see that effect that's in there. There is a practical outlay. You should never make a color scheme of anything that's red-green. Okay? Because if you're doing it, the likelihood of you getting, I think it's somewhere around roughly 10% of the adult population has red-green color blindness. So making a color scheme off red and green, which we do all the time, actually makes it very tough for people to have that scheme, you know, that color blindness scheme, to be able to tell the information you're trying to give them, because it just looks kind of grayish to them. All right. So we're going to take this back area, and that's where we're going to put our sensor array, and we're going to make it high density. We can also, this is kind of a simple way, and for some of the homework stuff, this is kind of the easiest way to think about it when you're setting up the triangles. You've probably all done the lens law where you've done the focus. That is another great way to do it. But for a lot of these things, if you know where that center of the lens is going, you can do this as an approximation for the cones. It gives you the outside light area. And this also, since we have a single lens, not a compound lens, the image comes in upside down. because a single lens has to flip it. That's exactly what, you just follow. The top goes through the center and it ends up at the bottom. So your eye actually sees the entire world upside down, and your brain flips it. So if you've ever wondered what babies are doing with all their time, they have to train their network to see all this kinds of stuff. The brain has to learn to adjust it. That's why babies, it looks like they're going through this whole awkward phase. Well, they've got to basically bootstrap all of this amazing hardware, right? And that's why they're always trying to look at things and touch things, because they're trying to figure out, I think I see this. What does it feel? Oh, it really is an object. The brain takes that as feedback and updates. All right. So you could see from these similar triangles, right? So how would I find out how big the image on the back of my eye is from this? Take a second, think, let me know. I'm not as concerned about the number, I care about how you set the equation. Why? That's the key thing. Similar triangles is the setup for it, right? So your two triangles have to be similar, so you can just overlay them. So the ratio of the distances, that's 17 millimeters and 100 millimeters, or 100 meters, has to be the same ratio as whatever's on the back of the eye to the 17 millimeters to the 100. Right? So similar triangles. Even if you do the full up lens drawing where you follow each the center path and the one that hits the focus on the left and the one that comes in straight and then goes to the focus on the other side of the line, you're still going to use similar triangles to solve it. So this one just uses the one that goes to the center. It uses one of the three, but the idea still holds. Okay? So use similar triangles to set those up. I'm figuring all of you have done this in your physics class. Is this correct? So I'm not going to waste your time by going through drawing the lens law equations and that. But you do want to know those. So the key thing to do is remember, you can draw those things, but the way you always solve them is similar triangles. All right, do we feel good with that one? Okay. I love these, and the book does too. I think it's kind of helpful to go. Weird things your eye does. So I want you to look at the closest image of this, so on your individual TV monitors. And look at those grayscale bars in here. Maybe I should have made these a little bigger so it's easier to. All right. So look at the grayscale things. Do those grayscale rectangles, do they look like they're constant color? Not at the edge, right? At the edge, what happens? Yeah, if you're on the lighter one, it looks a little lighter. And if you're on the darker one, it looks a little darker, doesn't it? It looks like it's going to edge. I promise you, it is not. It is constant color of gray all the way across. But what your eye is doing at that point where there's a sudden discontinuity, it's going to intensify the dark on the dark edge, and it's going to lighten the light on the light edge. Why would your brain do that? What's that? It increases contrast. It exactly does. Right? It makes those edges stand out. And remember, edges are important to you. You're not just trying to find some smooth, cool-looking picture. Edges tell you where objects start and end. It helps you to navigate. It helps you to find the things you want to get. So sacrificing some accuracy for an increased clarity is often a very helpful thing. When we get to filtering, we're going to take advantage of this feature. We're going to cause it, if we want to sharpen something up, we'll do a similar effect to this, where we'll create what's called a sharpen mask, and it'll create this exact little spike waveform. And we'll add it on top of it, and it'll make those edges stand out really, really sharp. It's technically not as accurate, but it's more helpful. So it's an important feature for us to do because it really does help bring out what you care about. All right, so this is just showing you the actual intensities. You can see they're constant. This is showing the perception. So on the lighter side, it gets lighter. Or sorry, on the lighter side, it gets lighter. On the darker side, it gets darker. This is another kind of important one to understand. Let me make this really big. Notice the center gray squares. What can you tell me about them? They look like the same, different? It does, doesn't it? Would you believe they're all the same? They are. All those gray ones are identical. But they look different, don't they? Your eye and actually pretty much everything else is going to measure what a level of something. I'm not even going to say light. This is actually true with sound. It's true with all kinds of different things. Right? You get used to some set level, and what you notice is differences. You don't measure things in an absolute scale. You measure them relative. So if things are really quiet, and then I talk loud, it's going to seem much bigger than if I'm already talking loud and I go the same amount up. Right? Because it's the contrast to the background. So when you're looking at intensities, the perceived intensity, and this is not just for people, this is for anything, perceived intensities are going to have to do with the ratio to the background, the larger amount of the image. So against the dark background on the left, the change to that mid-level gray is going to seem huge. So it's going to make it look artificially lighter, even though it's not. And when you go to the very light background on the right-hand side, the change to the mid-gray is also a very huge thing, just in the opposite direction. So it makes that gray look darker, even though it's not any different. Same thing happens to your sensors when they measure it to everything. Right? Your noise level is all based off of this. So it's relative intensities that matter, and that's what you should kind of pick up from this one. All right. So this is kind of a typical setup for an array. This is for a grayscale array. And there's 3 different versions here, right? So we have that single one up there. Maybe your eyes are better. I should stretch this a little. Works better for my eyes we're talking about. So this is kind of the upper image there. You see the energy coming in. That could be any energy. It could be photons. It could be whatever, right? We have energy coming in. For us, it's typically photons. Those photons are coming in. The first level thing you're going to see is a filter. Okay? And the reason you're going to have that filter is because otherwise you're going to detect all kinds of different things. So if you want, for instance, to pick up red, right, or you want green, or you want blue, you want to cut off all the other light. But not just if I want red, for instance, I don't just need to cut off green and blue. I need to cut off infrared, right, because there's also photons emitting by heat, hot objects, right, black body radiation. There's ultraviolet light. There's all kinds of stuff out in the environment. You don't want those recording as a color, right? You want to get If you want to know that's red, you only want to record the red color. When you want green, you only want the green color. Okay? For most people, even if it's a grayscale image, you want visible light. You don't want infrared and ultraviolet. So that first filter is going to remove all the stuff you don't want in there. Because otherwise that material is going to have a really wide response range. Has anybody ever taken a transistor and removed the outer plastic coating? Why do they all have plastic coatings? It's not just LEDs that emit light. All transistors, all diodes emit light. LEDs just emit them in a color range you want to see. So if you didn't put that plastic coating on, you'd see blinking lights all over the place. But not only that, every one of these transistors, every time you have a PN junction, when a photon hits it, right? So if I take, everybody know what a PN junction is? Yes? Yes. Right? Okay. So when I have a PN junction, if I take that junction and I reverse bias it, what happens? Does current flow or not flow if I reverse bias? It does not, right? So the whole purpose is you're trying to force it so that gap. Remember, you take the P and N material. The P has positive charge carriers. The N has the negative charge carriers. Put positive and negative together, what happens? They mix up and they're gone, right? So you get this depletion zone. So you put the P and N together, and right at the boundary zone, they cancel each other out. So nothing can flow because there's no charge carriers. It's a big dead zone. If you reverse bias, you cause that dead zone to get bigger. What would happen if just all of a sudden, in the midst of that nothing, I made a charge carrier to appear? It would flow, wouldn't it? It would carry charge. I'd be able to record that there was a current flow. So if I take a diode and I reverse bias it, and remember, what happens when photons hit a material? They knock an electron off. Right? That's called the photovoltaic effect. Yes? This is how solar panels work, right? And we just put them in a particular range that we wanted. That's why a lot of this looking for different semiconductors and everything is a materials process, because you're trying to find ones that are going to absorb photons in the energy range you want, or emit them in the energy range you want. So it's going to get struck, it's going to emit an electron, that electron will flow. So every photon that hits creates a charge carrier. You get more photons in the right band, what happens? You get a really good current. So I reverse bias it, it prevents there from being any stray currents happening, and then anything that gets struck, right, by a photon is going to generate current, and I can measure that current. I can also get a material like a capacitor that'll just hold it up, and I can store them for a while and then open the gate and measure them. That allows me to slowly build up the charge. Like, for instance, when I'm doing it for astronomy, I might want to collect over a period of time and just build up that charge because I'm trying to view some distant object. So I build it up and then I open the gate and read them out. So that filter gives me the range I want. That sensing material is usually a semiconducting material. That's why most of the ones you see that are out there, you get these CMOS sensors. Well, CMOS is how you build the rest of the chip too. Well, they don't put any protective layers to screen it out, because otherwise your computer would constantly be hit by these photons and you'd have charges appearing out of nowhere in the middle of your computer. Would that be a good thing? No. Does that ever happen? Yeah, it does, right? You ever get weird errors that happen? It can actually happen. It's called single event upset, SEUs. It happens all the time in space where you have a lot heavier radiation, much more powerful. It'll penetrate even through a lot of our filters. So we have to put better filters on the outside. We often have to do what's called a Faraday cage to protect it, right? Um, Anybody know what a Faraday cage is? Yes, what's a Faraday cage? Exactly, yeah. So I put a conductive grid and I want to ground it to something. In space, we usually just do it to the outer shell. Okay? And basically, when one of those things it hits the metal. Metal's highly likely to absorb it, and then it just pulls it away. So we often have to protect the electronics from them. Otherwise, you would get all these event upsets and your system would go bad. Okay? We have to do the same thing if you ever get into medical applications. A lot of radiation in there, same exact thing happens. Your devices can get damaged. You can get false readings due to radiation around them. All right, so this sensing material is most likely going to be CMOS, and it's going to, you've got two options. You either have this kind of slow build-up one. This is often done with, it's an older technique called charge-coupled devices. But basically, both of them are using semiconducting materials. Charge-coupled devices are usually a little bit bigger, and it allows them to kind of build up charges and go. They're more expensive. It's kind of one of those weird things, an older thing that's more expensive. But it is often used in a lot of astronomy applications. Even though it's not as fancy as some of the things we can do with CMOS, it actually can be set up better for observing very small quantities. So you'll often see these, they'll say CCD, charge-coupled device. That's that old style for them. And you need it if you're going very low. So you have the outer housing there from which you're going to read things out. You have the power in. All right, so you're basically going to charge it. The other big difference that you get with a charge-coupled device is the charge-coupled device is a big device and it really just stores it. And you're going to output the device, and then external, they have an amplification circuit to get what you want. On most CMOS cameras, we make them really small because we can get very sensitive materials, and we build an amplifier in on each one. So that allows me to read them out faster. But if you're doing something like astronomy, speed is not your concern, and our smaller devices are more prone to errors. So high accuracy is given by the older, kind of more blocky device, and that's really what they care more about. So that's why that trade-off comes in. They get bigger ones, they can gather more light. It's less prone to errors. The other big thing you'll have on these is that filter is not perfect. Right? I might say that I want something that lets through red light, but it doesn't perfectly let through red light. And it doesn't perfectly block out green or whatever else. So what it will do is it's going to have what's called a quantum efficiency. How much does it let through? Okay? And you want it to let through a lot of your red and block a lot of the greens and blues and infrareds, but you will not get perfect. So you have to look at what that quantum efficiency. That's really important when you go to astronomy or medical apps. So, you know, really good cameras will have this type of measurement, but like the one on your cell phone, they don't worry about that. That's why they can make them really cheap. But a really expensive, you know, camera is going to have a similar, it might even have a worse resolution, but they're going to spend their money on getting really good filters and really good lenses, very low distortion. Because those are the ones that's going to actually give you a higher quality, a higher trueness to the color. So if you've ever had two friends take pictures on their phones, and one of them ends up looking kind of more greenish, and one looks a little more reddish, and you put the two pictures next and they look really different, what you're seeing is the efficiency, how well did it filter out the light. Now, for your kind of pictures, we can tweak it afterwards, so we just say, who cares? Go with the cheap thing and away you go. Those lenses, the filters, are the expensive part. Really good filters are a lot of money, because you just have to improve that quantum efficiency. So when you're looking at a job and you're trying to pick what's the right thing to do, you need to figure out how good do I need to screen out these colors to get the right band. Does that make sense? Okay. So the rest of this, right, you see a single line there. Can you imagine a reason why I might want a single line sensor? In the top one, a single pixel sensor, we do it just to show you the detail. We don't actually, that single line one, we actually build a lot of single line sensors. The question is, why might I build a single line sensor? Can you think of a time you ever want that? So in a way, but you actually have that bottom one on your phone, the square grid array. But that's a good guess. How many of you have ever gotten mail? How do they get the letter to your house? They have to read the outside of the envelope, right? So they have to take a picture of it. How do you take a picture of envelopes? They do. So they have these machines. Have you ever seen the machines running them through? They'll have a single one of those line arrays. They know how fast it's feeding. So they'll just take pictures really rapid out of it as it's going by. And they know the speed so they can reconstruct the 2D image. And they never need to stop. They just take the pictures really fast line by line and it just assembles them up because you know how fast it's moving. This exact technique, you ever scan on one of the photocopiers? If you go look at most ones where you have a feed-in document, you'll have the main flat array. But to feed them really quick, you don't stop and then take the image and then go to the next. Then even if you do, if you look down there, there's actually, you see that light that progresses across when you tell it scan and you put down? It's doing a single line array, and it's feeding. But when you feed it through, it doesn't use that part. You'll see a really thin extra glass piece there. And that has a line array sensor under it. And it knows how fast it's feeding your document. It does the same thing that the post office does. They read it as it's passing by, right? And they just know the speed, snap the pictures fast enough, correct for the motion blur, and you're done. Okay? Good, clean, crisp image. And you can feed it much faster than stopping to take a photo. So it allows really high-speed applications. So a lot of assembly lines, manufacturing does this. It's also used in medical. Let me just skip to the next slide for a second, then we'll come back. This one, so this is reading a film drum that's going off. But that's not the one I want to show you. So you see the scanner on the left. See that circular one with the object going through it? See the X-ray source? So that circular ring around the outside is take that linear array and turn it into a ring. You've got an emitter on one side, and the whole rest is just a bent detector. This is how you make a 3D scan of the human body. Right? We just feed you through the ring. Right? So that's why they have the patient lay on the table and they have you see those big rings that's going on. Usually inside that ring they'll move the array so they don't disturb the patient. So they pick the area they want to go to. But if you want a really big picture, you can actually feed the patient through it slowly. Right? And it just takes a whole bunch of individual pictures. And depending on the generation, it either does a whole ring or it kind of spirals around you as a continuous feed for you going through. But it's basically doing that array. So medical imaging, those things are already ridiculously expensive. You don't want a bunch of X-ray sources. It's cheaper to have a single source and then measure the stuff on the other side to generate them, to get your images. So medical imaging is almost always also done by the linear arrays. So it turns out for a lot of the automated processes that are out there, we don't actually use the square arrays because they're just not as efficient. The linear arrays are much, much better. If a human being is using it, we are impatient. I mean, I don't know if you are, but I'm certainly impatient. And as I get older, my hand gets shakier too. So I take worse and worse pictures. So you don't want to delay because you're going to get, the longer you delay, the worse a picture I'm going to make because, right? So that's why you want a square array and just snap it fast. But know the reason why you would pick each one when you're going through. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to go back for a sec because I want to look at this square array and have you. This is going to affect one of your homework problems. And this is one that people often get confused on. So I want you to look at this and for us to talk about it before you have to face this homework problem. Okay? So imagine those gray areas are the sensing material. What do you notice around the gray area? There's gaps. Why can't I just put the gray areas right up next to each other? Could I? Could I put the gray areas right next to each other and not put those gaps? It would transfer heat, but the white, the gap material is going to do that too. So you're in the right ballpark. It's just not heat that I'm worried about. If I took two semiconducting materials of the same stuff and stuck them next to each other, what happens? It becomes one. So if you don't have those gaps, you don't have a bunch of pixels, you've got one big pixel. And it's just going to take everything across the whole thing and average it, right? Because no matter how much the high resolution comes in, you're going to have an analog image coming in. If you have really big sensors, it's just going to average. If there's some grayscale in there, it's going to find the mid value, and that's it. You lose all detail. That's why you get this kind of chunky box that looks in. So we want higher resolution. We want small things. So you have to separate it so the charge can't flow. So we have to put something that will insulate to separate. Well, that insulating layer won't image anything. So you have to count that when you're looking at what's going to record on the image for them. Now, I said this is grayscale because at the moment, I haven't distinguished that there's different colors I want to read out of this. We typically do what colors? Red, green, and blue. Why? That gives you a really good representation of what the human eye likes to see. Okay? Those are the ones you're going to typically find to do it. There's a lot of red light. You get good contrast from green and blue. Okay? Your brain can fill in everything else from those three. So it's a really good set of ones to pick. So I have to set those up into a pattern that's going to look like one colored pixel, even though it's not. It's going to be a bunch of grayscale images. So what we do is we take groups of 4, and we make one red, we make one blue, and we make 2 greens. Because green just turns out to just be a little bit worse than the others, so getting twice as much just kind of helps fill in. Okay? And you'll just see arrays of these get copied. And that will make a color CCD array. It's a whole bunch of these, and you just change the filters on the outside. The sensing material is basically the same. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so let's imagine for a sec I zoomed in on this gray part here. We're going to consider this a gray image, right? We'll ignore the color part. And the reason why I'm going to ignore the color part, when you're doing color image processing, all you're going to get is you'll get 3 images, a red plane, a green plane, a blue plane. And each of those is going to be basically a grayscale image. So for the rest of the course, that's about as much as I'm ever going to talk about color in here. Right? Miscellaneous mention, but all your processing, when you're processing on image, you're processing on grayscale planes. So we're going to do the vast majority of our stuff just dealing with grayscale planes. And if you ever needed to deal with a color image, then you got 3 grayscale planes. So you just do the same thing scaled up. So to avoid the extra complexity, I'm just going to deal with grayscale images from now on. When you deal with it, and then you just see it does work. You just stack them. And then on the output devices, we show a red pixel, a green pixel, and a blue pixel, appropriately lighted by the intensity of whatever those different imaging planes are, and your eye blends them all together. Okay, now consider this squares here. let's say I wanted to get at least a 3 by 3 set of pixels to detect something. How would I have to position a circle? Right? Because remember my camera, my lens and everything's going to give me a circle image. How would I have to position that to make sure that it fell on at least a 3 by 3 area? It is going to have to be bigger. So I want you to look at this and consider. Let's even do it simple. Let's just say I just want to hit one pixel, but it's got to illuminate one complete pixel. A partial illumination of pixel is no good. I need at least one pixel fully illuminated. And I don't know where the light's going to fall in this ray. It can fall anywhere, right? So look at that and tell me, how big do I have to make that to guarantee that one pixel will get fully illuminated? How big does the circle have to be?
Seems like the diameter of the circle needs to be twice whatever is square.
You're close, but you're not quite there. Think on it a little bit. Like, I'd suggest draw the array on there, and then draw yourself circles in different positions and see. Right? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the worst case scenario. Right? What is the worst thing that can happen to you? Right? Engineers, as a general rule, we always want to deal with the worst case. Because if you dealt with the worst case, then you certainly handled the best case too. So look it over, come back, give me an answer. Take a few minutes. Okay, we're going to do a pair up thing. So pick a partner and explain what you think is the answer. And remember, I'm going to be really nitpicky on this, right? I want to know exactly what it needs to be in terms of this picture, right? If you're off even by a small amount, I'm not going to accept. So talk to each other and see if you can poke hole in each other's design. Take a couple minutes. Here's examples of like details. I see some good discussions. I see some people have finished up. Does anybody have an answer for me yet? We have one group thinks we have an answer. Do we have an answer? Well, if you can convince the two of yourselves, then you can probably convince me. Right? I mean, I'm just older and I've seen a bunch more. But that's. So actually, pretty much everyone will have an array set. Some of them are even possible. So usually CCTs have electrical because they don't have the amplifier connected. So they have to shift them down. Right? And the shifting of it, breathing up. And that's usually the question. But I don't actually care about that. But I care about, I want to know how big is my circle now. It guarantees that you will make at least one. No, that's totally fine. I want to think about other stuff too. I'm glad to hear. I just want to make sure you can get my answer. You ready? You guys think you got an answer? Smallest circle guarantees one. What you want to do is imagine circles that are different areas and see. Can I get at least one next one? You can draw a paper down there. You can kind of imagine circles, and then try to find what would be the worst. Because I mean, my best scenario would be right. I cover a single pixel, right? Right. If I shape all right on that, not on this one. What happens if it shifts over? Okay. Now, if I knew it all the way to the next pixel, I'd be good again, wouldn't I? Right. You want to start thinking in terms of, okay, if I move it around, what's going to happen? So think about where would be the worst spot in this mountain? Okay, so how big would it have to be to guarantee at least one? At one fully illuminated pixel, how big does it have to get if you were in the worst spot? Because Murphy's Law says the worst thing's going to happen. That's just life. So, you know, as engineers, we want to be ready for the worst case scenario. We don't want something to fail when something needs us to happen. I'll give him another second or two. And then so, how big was that mushrooms and what you see? All that's what I want. I want to know now. Because is that thing really there? It is. It can actually be really big. It shows it's small. It's the national output. Often it would be like, but they usually try to make that people change what's called the master. So it creates kind of this distortion. But it does happen, for instance, in medical imaging. You'll have a square right in a plane, and then between the planes where you're taking them, it's right there. And then we'll try to do, we'll set splines and stuff to try to get you. Or when we get the 3D pixels back, because it's often very expensive to actually measure that exact sphere. And if the motor's off a little bit, it's a little bit off, so you have to adjust.
Would you ever see, I mean, this would be really hard to talk about this really, but in this kind of problem, when they do, like, squares don't mean anything,
Yeah.
so like, maybe if you have like hexagons or something like that.
So you theoretically could, but then how do you display it on the screen easily? So that's the other half of it. When it goes to a screen, we've got a rectangular array of pixels. So then we have no easy way to show it. But yeah, we sometimes do actually sample, you know, not a linear array. It turns out linear array is the worst one numerically in an answer. So it's the most error prone. It's just the easiest. But different samplings, you know, Chebyshev sampling and stuff like that is actually much better. Okay, we're almost at our time. Does anybody have an answer for me? First hand up I see. Help us out. So how would I know what that is? Okay.
I can figure that out. I just need to know what the width of that gap is.
So you know what that width of that gap is. How do I know as an engineer what the width of the gap is? I make up a variable, right? And then you're the one who gets to design it. So, you know, you don't know how big that side of the pixel is, but you created something and you call it the side of the pixel. And you said it's square. You took S for the side of the pixel, and you multiply by square root of 2. Is it any different for that gap? Okay. Okay, so if I want to know, are you giving me a diameter or a radius? Diameter. So I want 2 times what? You said 2 times square root of 2 times s, the side of the pixel, is that correct? And how much times the gap? G times square root of 2. Anybody disagree with them? Nobody disagrees? Darn, that means you're all right. So yes, that is correct. That gap can actually be significant. It looks small here because that's what they're kind of showing off on it. But that gap can actually be big. Sometimes it's small, but even if it's small, any amount that that's off is going to be the amount that won't shade, right? And if you don't fully cover the pixel, that pixel is going to count as if it doesn't see something, or it does see something, depending on whether you're doing light or dark, right? And so that's going to change the light intensity of it. And if you get too much light, it might not record as whatever your object is. So one of the homework problems asks you a thing where you're trying to figure out looking for defects. And you're going to have to do a very similar thing to this. It's a 2x2 in that one. But it's the same type of an idea. And those little gap separations matter, and diagonal matters. So just be real careful. You'll figure out the spot size using lens law, and you will figure out how big in order to respond to it by taking a look at these pictures and the measurements of them. And then you got to make a match up and say, you know, I believe it's you're picking the lens if I remember right. All right, we good? All right, so this gives you your whirlwind tour of how things are created into images. So I hope you all have a great day. I'll be stopping the recording now.